Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Write an Adventure, our ongoing live stream where we are creating a completely custom campaign in real time. I'm RJ Kerr, your host, and today is our 100th episode, so kind of a big mile marker for us. So thank you all for being here. I'm really excited to work on this project with you all today. And so I thought that today we would, in honor of doing something a little special, I thought that we would actually take a crack at building this new novel monster from the Monster Hunt side quest that we've been working on over the last couple sessions. But before we jump into that, let me give you a little bit of a recap in case you're new here or you haven't caught up on some of the other videos. So, as I mentioned, we are writing a completely custom campaign in real time with its own, unique domain of dread. That way, you can see all the pieces and parts, all the thoughts and ideas, all of the questions and considerations that go into doing this using my style and technique. Um, we have already done a fair amount on this. We've completed a lot, enough that if you were running this for your own home campaign, you could absolutely be started with this already. Um, but we decided to use a story circle structure to give ourselves a little bit of guidance in terms of what we needed in our campaign in terms of rise and fall and the exposition and some of the rising actions, some climaxes and that sort of deal. But think of it more as a structure from which to deviate. We're just using this as a guideline, and we've done a lot to fill it out already. So we have figured out how our characters enter into this domain of dread through a portal that opens on the blood moon. We have talked about what kind of personal motivations would draw them into this domain. We have figured out where they land at a shanty town that we're calling Darkport that sits on the edge of an inland sea. We have uh, a cat in our laps. We have we have realized that this sort of inland sea is a major part of this domain of dread, where it used to be the base of a thriving civilization, now fallen into ruin and flooded. We've also figured out this domain of dread has a dread lord that we're calling Ovander, who is an elemental evil of some kind. We're still figuring out exactly how Ovander fits into the overall story and how he'll interact with the characters throughout. We have figured out our very first adventure where the characters are kidnapped and briefly enslaved and have to escape their captors. And in doing so, learn about the existence of a long lost artifact that gives the wielder some modicum of power over the domain. And it becomes apparent that finding this artifact is going to be their best bet for escaping with their lives. Now we're working on a very proactive part of the adventure. Where the characters can kind of get out of the world, they can follow clues they found, and they can search for this artifact however they see fit. And to help with that, we're using a node style structure where effectively we have these nodes, which I prefer to call investigative scenes, that are situations within the adventure, whether those are simple encounters, more complex encounters, they are, more complex social encounters, they are mini adventures, full fledged adventures, what have you. But there are opportunities for the characters to find clues that lead them to other nodes or investigative scenes. And so, they can sort of chart their own path based off of the specific clues they find or they don't find or what have you. And so we've built a number of those already. We've built a five room dungeon in there. We have built a complex social encounter. We've built a heist style adventure. Now we're working on a simple social encounter, and that has opened up into a side quest that we were working on, where a former monster hunter who has information, has clues for the characters, also has a little bit of a quest for them that they go and finish off the monster he was never able to do so. He was never able to tackle. So today, since this is an interesting sort of monster build, I thought that we would spend our time doing that. So before we jump in, as always, this is an interactive stream, so please feel free to jump in the chat with any thoughts, ideas, opinions, comments, concerns, and questions you might have. Always love hearing from you. You guys come up with some really creative, really cool ideas, and I'm really excited to see what we come up with today. So, let me go and share my screen here and take a quick look at the chat. And hey, hello everyone. Thanks for being here again. Good to see you, Mr. Mix. Good to see you, Brooke. Good to see you, Ben. Always fun to have our regulars here in the channel. Can't wait to see what we build today. All right, so oh, hey, Jonathan Frost. Yep, centennial episode. Excited about that. Yeah, can't believe it's been 100 of these already. It's wow. It doesn't feel like it's been going on that long. um, all right. So I figure the first thing we should do if we're going to build this monster is we should kind of review our ideas for it real quick. Um, because we came up with this idea that this monster is actually like a cascading series of clones, right? Like, it starts off as one clone, it's slayed, the new clone activates, the new clone comes online with new abilities that make it a little tougher, a little stronger, and that continues on until the characters destroy the clone jars, the eggs, or whatever you decide on in that, um, and ultimately destroying the creature. So we had some ideas about what sorts of abilities it would have and that it might gain as it evolved. But one of the core things we thought about that we wanted to have is that uh, it has a unique ability where anybody who doesn't possess a piece of the monster immediately forgets its existence once it leaves their sight. Um, and you guys had the nice modification idea of making that an intelligence saving throw each round, so that while, yes, outside of combat, you're pretty much guaranteed to forget the thing exists. But while in combat, you might have the chance of remembering it if you just look away for a moment. So, with these ideas in mind, we're going to go ahead and start building out this stat block, I think. So, let's go ahead and open up one of our new monster stat blocks here. We go monster stat block. And we need a monster name for this. We'll come up with one in a bit. So, or if you have ideas, toss in the chat. I'd love to hear them. But as always, when we build monsters, I like to start with some of the thematic stuff and then work on the actual math of it later. So let's go ahead and start with some of the special traits here to kind of figure out what it has, because this one's going to have a fair number of special traits, especially since we want to build one stat block that scales as we go. So let's see here. Let's say let's see here. Just say memory is affected. This is our sort of our core ability for this monster, right? You forget it when you're not looking at it. So we're gonna say something to the effect of, I think, let's see here. When TK monster is not within line of sight, a creature it begins to erase itself from the viewing from the, we'll just say the target creature, but we know what we mean. The target creature's memory. Anytime a creature stops looking at TK monster, it must make a DC 6 intelligence saving throw or forget monster exists. Making it, actually, we'll use the new nomenclature for this. Let's see here. Anytime a creature stops looking at TK monster, must make a DC. We'll figure out what the DC is based off of its CR. Intelligence saving throw. Let's say failure. Um, the creature, so the target creature forgets TK monster exists and loses its next action. I think we might want to work on that a little bit mechanically. What does it lose, right? Um, because we're going to end up in a situation where the players won't forget the monster exists, right? So there's likely to be a certain amount of metagaming that goes into this, right? They're going to go, oh well, I don't remember the monster, but I see everybody else is really scared, so I whirl around and I see it, and I can just take my turn as normal now, right? So I think that there needs to be some sort of mechanical penalty in combat for that, because it's easier to role play that outside of combat, but in combat, um, I think we need to have something that it's lost. So maybe it loses its next action, maybe it loses its next action in bonus action or what have you. Or maybe it simply can't attack or cast spells, or we'll massage that. I think to start, just losing its next action makes sense. And then we can say success. The target creature remembers TK monster for 1 round and may act normally. Something along those lines. Should be may act. Cool. Yeah, so that'd be my first stab at this core trait, this memories affected sort of deal. But it looks like we got a couple opinions in the chat here already. Fantastic. Let's see what you guys think. So, Ben Elder says the Borakara, known commonly as the Devourer of the Forgetful. Maybe the name is found on an ancient tablet in the creature's lair, and that's what the hunters named it. Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, one of the cool things about doing a monster like this is that really the name is for us, the DM. It's shorthand when we put this in our notes and that kind of thing, so we don't always have to like spell out a description of the monster. We never have to tell the characters the name of the monster. They can come up with their own name for the monster. What would they call it? It can have an official name, and that's for our use. But if there's no reason for them to know, then they don't necessarily need to know. And they could discover it later. Like you said, they could discover it in tablets in the creature's lair or something like that. They could, frankly, what I would probably do is I would probably have the true name of it in the notes in the wizard's tower. Um, so the so that the characters can discover a description of this character and a description of this monster and the monster's notes in there, and so that if they do that quest after the side quest, it's like, oh, that's what it was called. If they do the Wizard's Tower before the side quest, then they have this sort of this description of this odd monster, and then when they encounter it, they go, oh, this is the thing that they were talking about. We could also, to that end, depending on, well, okay, what do you think of this? So in Shadowdark, there's this magic item mechanic called it's called True Name, and the idea is that if you know the true name of a specific creature, for the most part, they're talking like devils, demons, celestials, that kind of thing, but like the true name, not the common name, but like its individual name, that you get advantage over influencing it, and it has disadvantage to the it has disadvantage to on roles to avoid being influenced by you and that kind of thing. And so the idea is that you have a lot more sway over this creature. And so what we could do perhaps is that in the wizard's tower, we could have in the notes the common name for this creature, description of it, and then its true name, so that if they come to the side quest after, it's a little easier for the characters to engage with this creature, being able to use that sort of information against it. But that could be something that we work into, that we work into the wizard's tower bit here. So let's just put a quick note here, and we'll say true name, and we will figure that out as we go. Figure out the mechanics on that. Okay, so let's continue on with our comments here. We've got if the monster has eggs, would it be part amphibian and have a tongue it could lash and pull with? Ooh, Brooke, I kind of like that idea. Our concept of it physically is a little bit vague, other than it's vaguely insectoid and kind of lobster-like. But I like the idea of the lashing tongue. There is something uncanny about that. Yeah. So let's put that bad boy in here. Tongue lash. Cool. We'll figure out the exact mechanics on it as we work on it here. We should also probably, to that effect, do a claw attack, because we know that it's got some claws on it too. And we'll figure out whether it has multi-attack or not based off of what CR we make this creature. The cool thing is that we can make it a relatively high CR since it's a single monster that the characters are facing off against. They're unlikely to face mobs of these at any given time. So yeah, I like the tongue lash idea. I don't know, actually. I think about it, I don't know if anybody here has watched Full Metal Alchemist, but I was thinking about gluttony as soon as you mentioned that. Yeah, I kind of like that vibe. It's cool. Awesome. Good idea, Brooke. Let's see here. Mr. Rex says, ooh, that could be cool and creepy to learn in combat. Yeah. That could be. Especially if it's a creature that you don't expect to have that sort of thing. Like, because if it looks vaguely like frog-like or toad-like, that players are gonna think, oh, they're gonna tongue lash comes out, they're okay, that makes sense. But if it looks a little insectoid and then it shoots out this long sticky tongue, and drags characters in or that kind of deal, that'll be more surprising. That's cool. I like that. Let's see. Jonathan Frost says double disadvantage. Ben Elder says maybe you could have a version of Hunter's Mark where if one player has the ability to remember it, the creature prioritizes that character. Ooh. Let's copy that down as an option. We're going to say memory marked. And we'll say TBD. TK monster. Instinctually prioritizes prey that can remember it. Okay, instinctively. Not that it. Wow, don't do this to me, Grammarly. Not that it can remember, that can remember it. Which occurs to me, we should make a note about keeping a piece of the monster in the memory affected bit. I did note that down. So under the success, the target creature remembers TK monster for 1 round and may act normally. Any creature that possesses a piece of TK monster, including blood smears, automatically remembers, I should say automatically succeeds this save. Cool. And then we're gonna, so jumping back here real quick, TK monster instinctively prioritizes prey that can remember it. And then we're just gonna make a little hunter's mark mod note there. And we'll build that out as we go. Cool. All right. Let's see. Ben Elder says, "Yeah, I like that more. I know my party would just call it that thing. LOL." Yeah, you know, I think that's kind of one of the joys of playing D&D is that when the players start world building, right? When they start coming up with their own names for stuff, and then for example, with this creature, since people don't remember it when it's when they can't see it anymore, they wouldn't have people wouldn't have a name for it. But once the existence of this creature becomes more widely known, after the characters have destroyed or think they've destroyed all of them, and maybe that affects the memory condition or what have you. But if this creature was to become more widely known, people would start calling it whatever it is that the players call it, or whatever it is the characters call it. And so now, whatever choice the players have made, whatever silly name they've come up with, or serious name, or spooky name, or what have you, um, uh, they've added to this world. They've created a tangible element that changes this world, and they'll see the effects of that. So yeah, I love when players do that kind of thing. Jonathan Frost says, "Yep, I like the mechanic a lot. The true name mechanic, I think, is what you're talking about there." Yeah. Well, thank you. I think that I just think that's a fun little thing from Shadow Dark. It's something that comes up in a lot of fantasy books, right? If you know the true name of something, what is it, like Wizard of Earthsea or whatever, they talk about the true name. I think they talk about true names in Name of the Wind, all that kind of stuff. It's just a cool idea. Mr. Mech says tongue grants grapple or restrained. Yeah, I'm with you. It should grant one of the two of those on a hit. So let's just make a note. Let's say, yeah, on a hit, the target is grappled, say restrained, slash restrained. We'll figure out which one it is. On a hit, the target is grappled slash restrained. And then we can, let's see, on its turn, target may take an action DC XX to end the grapple slash restrained condition. Cool. And obviously we'll pick one or the other when we're doing this. Yeah, so we'll figure that out as it becomes, as we build this creature out, as it becomes contextually clear for us what makes the most sense here. But yeah, that's a good idea for sure, Mr. Max. Let's see here. Jonathan Ross says the tongue would restrain a character because there are no bugbears in this setting. Who said there's no bugbears? I'm such a big fan of the new bugbear adjustments. I've done horrible things to characters with bugbears recently, and it's wonderful. From my perspective. From my perspective. Let's see. Mr. Beck says you see a party member being dragged by something they can't see would be terrifying. Uh, Brooke says I'm imagining something like No Face once he gets angry. LOL. Let's see here. Mr. Mech says, while restrained by the tongue, the person that is grabbed can see it. Yeah, I mean, I assume that they could. I wouldn't think they couldn't. Because, I mean, I would think that if they can see any part of the creature, they can see the creature, right? And so they can remember it. But that's a good point. It's, there are some mechanics that are like, oh, you have to be looking the creature in the eyes for this to affect. Things like, usually it's like petrification kind of stuff, like with basilisks or with medusas or that kind of deal. But that could be something that if we wanted to, we could work into this. But I think personally, if you can see any part of the creature, you can see the creature and you can remember it. Because kind of how do you engage if you're grappled, restrained by this thing, but you can't remember that it exists? Like, how does your brain rationalize that? How does a player play that as a character? That would be a weird dynamic. So yeah, so I agree with you. Absolutely, if if they're restrained by the creature, they automatically see it and can automatically remember it. Let's see here. Ben Elder says, I think maybe a weak poison can be good for early stage of the creature. Maybe a plus D4 for claw or tongue attacks. Maybe. Yeah, maybe the poison gets worse at higher levels for the clones, more damage, maybe more effects like lick paralyze or terror toxin, fear effect. Um, yeah, I like the idea of there being a poison element to this. There's cool things with poison, right? Is that you can do a lot of stuff with poison. Um, doesn't always have to be damage, which means it's relatively easy to toss in to some of this stuff. Because as we're doing the math on this, uh, when we do these various attacks, it may not make sense to add an extra D4 of dice or to scale the damage up, because that really could affect the CR, right? But to your point about the poison getting a little bit worse at higher levels, we could do things like at a low level, it's a save against the poison condition. Where they just have the regular poison condition, and as they get higher, as this creature gets more advanced, it powers up a little bit here. Um, the We could have a situation where now when they're poisoned, they are also they're stunned for a turn, or then they're paralyzed, and then they're whatever. We can build on that without affecting the damage from the attacks, and therefore without really affecting the creature's challenge rating, and still making it more difficult to face off against. So that's a good idea. The poison is a fun thing that we can work with here. Um, and so let's add that to the claws, because we already have a cool condition for the tongue. Let's do this with the claws. Because I absolutely can kind of see this being a thing where this creature's kind of got these, praying mantis kind of arms, this very, lobster-like body, and then this big set of jaws with this extendable tongue, and it can shoot the tongue out, grapple a creature, and pull, and pull them back, reel them in to attack them with these claws. I can absolutely see that being something that's sort of how this creature hunts. And so let's see here. We'll say on a hit, target must make a DC X Constitution saving throw. We'll say failure. The target creature becomes poisoned. and then we don't have to do a success condition because it's just they're just not poisoned in this case. Um, cool, cool. So to that end, let's go ahead and jot some of these advancement ideas down. So um, we could say, we'll say evolutions. As the TK monster. Before we get too far, I do want to capture that name, Ben. That was a good name for us to use here. I'm gonna keep writing TK monster in the stat block though, just for the time being. We'll fill it out later. So okay, so what was I saying? Okay, so as TK monster, TK monsters clones activate. Each clone gains a new ability as determined below. Clones retain all the abilities of previous clones. And we'll fill that in as we go. We'll say poison TBD, and we'll mark that out in a progression here. But one of the things we do want to say is clone creature. TK monster is a cloned creature. When one clone dies, another clone immediately activates. The new clone has all of the abilities and memories of the previous clone. Which means we probably don't have to put clones retain all abilities of the previous clones, but you know what? There's nothing wrong with clarifying that as we go. So let's see. Yeah, so we got some good notes here. We'll continue filling out some of the evolution points as we go. Yeah, so let's get back to the chat. Let's see what other ideas you guys can come up with here, or you have come up with here. There's a lot. Let's see here. Brooke says it has a lobster tail, right? So maybe a bludgeoning attack with it. Yeah, that's a possibility as well. So let's say. We might say tail slam, something like that. And to that end, you know, one thing we might do for this monster, and this is something we'll break out as we continue to develop it. Is that you know, we may decide to add, you know, legendary actions to this creature, especially because it's kind of you know, it's a mano a mano kind of creature, right? Like the characters are going to be fighting it, you know, one at a time for the most part. There is an obvious exception that comes to mind on this, and we'll touch on that in a bit here because we do want to keep it in our sort of our mental inventory here. We don't want to lose track of it because it really will affect this encounter or this adventure here. So you know, we may take some of these attacks and move some of them over to legendary actions or or the like. But for now, just keeping a running list of these is a good idea, and eventually deciding if it gets multi-tack and so on and so forth. Also, to that end, if it has a tail and it's got that lobster tail, it probably has a swim speed too. Swim 30 feet. Cool. We can always make that faster, but 30 feet's a good default there. Oh, hey, Worth. Welcome back. Good to have you here, man. Brooks says, in reference to the tail, would make flanking hard for PC. Yeah, that's absolutely true. It certainly would. One thing I would note is that technically flanking is an optional rule, and it's one of the optional rules that does not exist in the 2024 DMG. I still use it. Because I like it. I think it makes sense. But of course, there are certain monsters out there that would not be privy to flanking, right? Monsters with more with greater senses able to perceive more of their environment as once. Like for example, you know, I don't think you can flank a gelatinous cube, right? Because you can flank a goblin or a bugbear or a mind flayer because their eyes are facing forward. They're having to they look in one direction at a time, and if they've got attackers on both sides, they got to keep swapping back and forth, and and they're distracted as they're doing this. But something like a gelatinous cube that just kind of senses its whole environment wouldn't be affected by that. And so, I could see there certainly being something like that with this, where perhaps, this has blind sight or something along the lines. And, I mean, it is a river creature. Sometimes rivers are very opaque in their water, and blind sight would make sense. So let's put that as a potential thing here. So let's say blind sight, and we'll say XX feet. Probably has dark vision too, and so we'll say dark vision XX feet. Yeah, that would make sense. I mean, these sort of predatory senses here. We want to make this thing a predator. Okay, let's see your Mr. Mex says, would attacking from behind grant resistance or something, or is it not fully shelled? So I would. All right. I would say that the only thing that attacking from the other side of a creature should ever offer is flanking, right? Because otherwise you've got a track facing the entire time, meaning which direction is the creature facing when a particular attack occurs, and that can get very complicated in sort of in a combat situation, right? Especially while you're trying to run everything else as the DM, trying to figure out, well, was this creature facing character A or are they facing character B? And when the attack occurred, because and there will be all kinds of arguments about, well, I just hit it. It would look in my direction, and then that would distract it. Well, the other person attacks it from the back, or no, I came in from the side. It wouldn't look at me. The other person's still distracting it. So I wouldn't worry about putting in effects that specifically lend themselves to the creature's facing, although that seems more realistic. Because I absolutely see your point on that, right? Attacking its underbelly should be, it should do more damage or something like that. That would just make sense, narratively, but it just becomes very difficult to run when you're playing it. So let's see. Worth grab some butter and giant fork. Show the lobster monster who means boss. Who is boss? Yeah. I will say that if you were doing a goofy version of this campaign as opposed to the grim dark horror campaign we're working on here, you absolutely could give creatures odd vulnerabilities, like vulnerable to butter, you know, vulnerable to piercing weapons, so that if you do attack it with a fork, like it, you know, anything along those lines, you really could have some fun with that. Um, and you get very very creative. Um, let's see here. Jonathan Frost's vulnerability to fire. Um, let's see, vulnerability to fire at least to start with. It could lose the vulnerability as it clones. Um, yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that at all. You absolutely could do that. Conceptually, for like how I'm imagining this creature, especially since it's a river creature, um, I personally wouldn't come to the fire vulnerability um, uh, idea first. That hasn't jumped out at me, but I really would love to hear your where your thought process was on that, Jonathan, because you do come up with some amazing ideas, and you think very differently from me sometimes. So I'd love to hear what your thought on that was, because I don't want to rule that off. That's absolutely something we could do. Um, let's see here, and then Ben Elder says, could it have like a land version of an octopus ink spray to blind characters, maybe reskin the darkness spell, or fog cloud? Could do something like that. Um, I kind of think that's something that we should put into the later iterations of the clone. Um, bum. Let's see here. Say ink fog to start. We'll go with that. Um, let's see here. Okay. Ben says, yeah, Jonathan, that's really good. Maybe slashing vulnerability as well for early versions. Um, yeah, again, there's no reason we shouldn't start the first one off with a vulnerability or something like that. You know, again, I thematically I wouldn't pick slashing. I would probably pick bludgeoning, to be completely honest with you, if we were going to do one of those. Um, the Simply because I think of like the hammers used to crush crabs, right, at crab restaurants and that kind of deal. Um, um, yeah, so I mean that's thematically that's what I would pick on there. Um, but yeah, we can pick a vulnerability for this. The only the only thing that I would caution you against, and it's only an issue when you're writing for other people. Okay, if you're writing this for yourself, absolutely, doing things like the vulnerability and then the creature losing that vulnerability later on makes a lot of sense because you're aware of it. If you're writing this for other people who are kind of reading the stat block on the fly, if you list out, up here with that there's a vulnerability to bludgeoning damage or what have you, or let's say Ben just maybe lightning damage, um, you know, but we have a vulnerability up here, and then later on is one of the evolution abilities is that it loses that vulnerability. Um, Somebody who's not as familiar with the stat block and they're kind of running it, reading it on the fly as they run this encounter is going to see the vulnerability, and they may miss the removal of that vulnerability down farther on. And so they may carry that vulnerability much further into the encounter that was intended. Um, but if it's your monster and you wrote it, it's a lot easier to remember that kind of thing because you're more intimately familiar with it, and so you don't get the same sort of uh, just conflict of awareness. So that's the only thing that I would say if we were adding vulnerability and changing that. Also, just being aware that if you put a vulnerability into a creature, it's going to be much weaker at the start, which is not necessarily a problem. We kind of want this creature to scale up, right? And so having that vulnerability in the beginning could make a lot of sense. And that could be one of the first things it loses, right? It could come back having lost that vulnerability initially. So the first clue to the characters that something's changed here is that it's no longer responding to that damage. Um, so let's see. Um, Yeah, Ben Elder says maybe lightning vulnerability to begin with because of the river theme. Jonathan Frost says it's primarily an aquatic creature. I was thinking it's more likely to hang out in colder environments. Also, carapace might be susceptible to heat. Yeah, I mean, certainly, yeah, that's an argument that could be made for it. Yeah, that could be a good enough reason. Yeah, to pick a fire resistance on that, for sure. Ben Elder says Red Lobster theme playing here. And then Jonathan Ross says maybe it needs a consistent vulnerability to offset the laundry list of potential immunities and invulnerabilities. Um, to that, that would be one way to work on balancing this, is have a consistent vulnerability, especially if we're going to give this thing a whole bunch of immunities or a whole bunch of resistances. Um, I would just say let's not give it a whole bunch of immunities and a whole bunch of resistances, because the problem with a consistent vulnerability, um, just metagaming wise, is that once your players figure out that it's there, they're just going to hammer that vulnerability, and nothing else is going to matter. It's like when you fight, twig blights. As soon as everybody figures out that they're vulnerable to fire, it is fire attacks all the way. Nobody bothers with anything else, right? So if we want this creature to really keep them on their toes, um, then I would not give it a consistent vulnerability. But to that end, I would also not lean heavily into immunities in terms of what it has here. I would lean more into scaling abilities, or new powers and that kind of deal, to make it a little more complicated, uh, and not so much worry about making it um, immune to anything. I might make it resistant to one or two things, but wouldn't necessarily make it immune to anything. Because that you make a very good point. If it's immune to all sorts of stuff, well, then how do you kill the darn thing, right? There's got to be a way. That being said, and I'm gonna contradict myself for a minute here. If that consistent vulnerability that you have is very unique, that could work out really well. Especially in that case, yeah, go give this monster a whole bunch of immunities, a whole bunch of resistances, make it nigh unkillable unless they have that very specific thing. And so what I mean there is, like, don't say that like it's weak to fire, it's weak to lightning, it's vulnerable to to psychic damage or something like that. I would say something along the lines of like, it is vulnerable to weapons coated with milkweed oil or something like that. Something that is so hyper specific, that the characters actually have to discover what that is through research and study and information about this creature, and have to prepare themselves for the fight in that case. Um, and so that's kind of a like a Witcher esque kind of approach to this, right? Which is totally valid. You 100% could do that with monsters, especially with a monster hunt sort of scenario. I don't know that fits where we're going here, where we want to be able to kill this thing again and again and again. But if we were creating one monster that we wanted to survive multiple encounters, um, then I would say 100% let's do that. Also, additionally, the characters can't, we can't discover a super specific vulnerability that this thing has because there's no way to research it because nobody remembers it exists, right? So, so that would put them at a deficit anyway. Um, yeah. So, uh, yeah. So, but to your point, that's definitely something you could do depending on the kind of monster you were trying to create, and the theme you were trying to build there. It's certainly a way to offset uh, a laundry list of, as you say, a laundry list of potential immunities and vulnerabilities. Benelux says maybe the siren has a special venom for the players as a reward. Um, yeah, potentially. Again, got to remember that the characters can go through any path here, right? So they may never talk to the siren ever. They may go through the whole campaign never interacting with the siren. And so if we make this adventure, if we make killing the monster hinge on getting this special venom from the siren, that becomes very frustrating to the player characters because or to the players because they won't necessarily intuit that they need to go talk to the siren to get this so they can then beat the monster. It's not a clear parallel. Um, the only way that I would say that we could do that with this particular monster, and again, I don't know that I would choose to do this, but an argument could be made for it. Is that since this creature was made by the wizard in the Wizard Tower, uh, and we've talked about there being some information about it there, uh, you know, it's this super specific vulnerability could appear in those notes. Um, that is a clearer line, especially since we know that Elias is aware that the wizard made it, and he can draw that connection there. He can make it obvious that there is a link, um, and so we could set it up that way. That this thing is, as it gets more and more powerful, it becomes almost nigh unkillable until the characters have um, that special thing that they need that they have to discover. Um, that being said, let's take a step back from this thought process real quick. Um, because this is where, how I mentioned that there's a fringe case here that we need to be aware of, that we need to keep in mind um, as we're building this out. Um, this mention of a consistent vulnerability and specific vulnerability um, might be important for this fringe case. So the fringe case is effectively this, right? Like, so we've got the characters as part of this adventure where they encounter this thing one by one, again and again and again. We've got 3 encounters with it, right? They have the first encounter where they fight it and they kill it. The second encounter where they find the village and that's been kind of ravaged by it. And the thing shows back up and they fight it and they kill it. And then the third one where the villagers offer them up as a sacrifice to this thing, not knowing they're offering it up to this thing specifically. But then again, they fight the creature, they kill it, and then they got to go to the creature's lair and destroy it there. And we talked about the lair being full of these clone eggs or clone jars or what have you. The and so we're going to end up in a situation there where these clones start popping off like popcorn, right? Because if the clones activate every single time one clone is destroyed, we're going to end up in a situation where they're surrounded by these things. And they come in, they kill the first monster, the next one pops right up. They kill that one, the next one pops right up. And they got to work their way through all of the eggs like this, all of the clone jars like this. And it can make for a really cool encounter if we run it right? Because think about this thematically, visually, they're in this, cave or what have you, or this old ruin or whatever you want. But like they're inside this interior space. They're fighting the monster. They strike it down immediately from the other side. One of the eggs bursts open and a new one leaps out, and they got to fight that one. And so they're just getting sort of this ongoing, just wave after wave after wave of this creature um, that theoretically gets stronger and stronger every single time. So to keep this from just being a war of attrition that the characters can't win because there are so many of these, or keeping us from being in a situation where they're like, there's 3 eggs in here. And so, so there's a limited number of possibilities. We can really hit home thematically with that sort of like that overwhelm of like, there's 100 eggs in here. And so 100 potential clones we're going to have to face, and sort of this like, oh shit moment, right? That the players could, that the characters will have. But if we have a really specific vulnerability they've figured out at this point and prepared for, well, they can just go in there and mow these suckers down. And so you end up in sort of another sort of thematic situation where it's like one shot, kill one shot, kill another, one shot, slay the third one there. And they're just literally just hammering these things down as they go, which could make for just, again, a really cinematic, a really thematic sort of encounter there. And it might be exactly what you're looking for. So, to summarize, I think I've talked myself into doing the thing that I said didn't fit, and that is a very specific vulnerability. So, thank you, Jonathan. That was a really good idea. Um, so let's work on that. And it looks like you've got some ideas, Jonathan. You see a weapon blessed by a holy person, a priest casts bless spell who survives an attack during a new moon. Very specific. Yeah, it could be all kinds of stuff. To that end, if we're going to pick something specific that is effectively um, I don't want to say a one-shot killer, but is extremely effective against this creature, that it's probably this wizard's fail-safe, right? It's probably something they built in there. Um, the whole thing for like Jurassic Park, where I forget what amino acid that they don't produce, but the dinosaurs, I think like lysine or something like that. The dinosaurs don't produce lysine. We've got to give it to them in their food, and that way, if they ever escape, they'll die because they can't make this. And so I imagine this wizard, if he's making these chimera homunculi, you know, mishmash of mad scientist creatures, then he's at least smart enough to think that at some point he might have to pull the plug on one, and coming up with a failsafe there. So if we came up with something that is in that this wizard would be able to get a hold of here, but it wouldn't be as common for everybody else. That's something we could certainly pick. And it could be as simple as a magic item that's in the wizard's tower. But again, that puts us in a position where, building this very specific vulnerability puts us in a suspicion where the characters may have to retreat from this adventure to go investigate the wizard's tower. But as long as they know that that's an option, that's something they can do, it's not a bad idea. Um, it's just something that we need to make sure we handle carefully in introducing this adventure. Um, let's see here. Ben Elder says, "Do you think it could be a good feature if the creature had a link with the wizard's tower, so they enter and so if they enter and trip a ward alarm, it comes running?" Um, I I think that yes, in the wizard's tower there should be something like that. I don't think it should be this creature. Simply because the fact this thing is out wandering the world suggests to me that, again, like Jurassic Park, nature found a way, and it got out of its bonds, and now it's out in the wild world, and the wizard is not in direct control of it any longer. But that in the wizard's tower there should be monsters that the wizard is in control of, who are linked to things like alarm spells that do show up if the characters move through that, and that would be a trap of that encounter. Um, and something that we're going to have to work on with the wizard's tower thing, and I don't want to digress too much here, but one of our ideas for the wizard's tower was that the characters get there and the wizard is overtly very welcoming, and tries to help them as much as he can, but really he's stalling them so he can turn them over to this aboleth led cult. Um, which means that the way that I kind of envision that adventure going, is that the uh, uh, the characters go into this knowing that they're going to have to find the clues they're looking for, not just by talking to the wizard, but perhaps sneaking around his tower. And so, while he is otherwise occupied, or that sort of thing. And so we end up in a situation where maybe characters have to keep him busy while others sneak around the tower and try to avoid these traps and these alarm traps or things like that. And they don't want to run into these other monsters and that kind of deal. Um, so we end up in this sort of it's almost like a heist, but it's almost like a complex social encounter. We have a little bit of both there. That we're kind of balancing against each other for a more unique sort of adventure feel. In which case, yes, 100%, I would have monsters in there that are attached to the alarms and wards. Um, Brooke says maybe even something not as strong as the wizards, but something our hermit figured out the way if the PCs don't go to the wizard tower first. Yeah. That's an interesting point. That is an interesting point. Because we do have this hermit character in there, and we did talk about how we're going to leave him light until we decide whether or not he's vital. Um, and we could have something that he has figured out. It's why he's survived this long. He has some memory of the creature. He's got a piece of it or something like that, and he could become an informational character. Um, but you should have to pull that information out of him. It should be something that he volunteers, because we again don't want to end up in a situation where the characters talk to him right away. They'll learn the secret, and beating all these monsters becomes trivial. Beating all these clones becomes trivial, but certainly something that he might be able to convey to them later. Because it's never a bad idea to have multiple places where a character can learn a thing, because it increases the likelihood that they will learn it. So that's an interesting point. We might want to do that. The one thing we can't do is say that Elias knows this secret, because if he knew it, he would have used it, and he'd armed the characters with it from the very beginning. So he can't know it, but we could have other characters that do potentially. It's an interesting idea. Okay. We know that it needs a vulnerability. Ooh. So let's put this in. Let's see here. Vulnerability. I forgot the L. All right, vulnerability. And we'll say DVD something painfully specific. Okay. Yeah, and let's see here. We're at our time here, but we've got one more comment. And we'll say, hold on. Who knows? Wizard, hermits, that kind of deal. So we don't forget that. Those are good ideas. Benel says maybe a hard to find local plant. They can make a paste that the creature is allergic to or was trained to fear. Perhaps it grants disadvantage to all the creature attacks. A local grown plant that's hard to find makes sense. Something along those lines makes sense. I would say that if whatever it is, whatever we're picking in here, it's something that we can go weapons with, or what have you, we can make weapons out of, or that kind of deal. Whatever it is, that it is something that we can say the creature is allergic to, and it may try to avoid that substance instinctively, but I wouldn't say that it grants disadvantage to the creature's attacks, because the creature's already vulnerable to it. It's already taking double the damage every time it's hit with this thing, right? But So I would leave it at vulnerability. But to your point about, as you say here, is something that the hermit, I'm sorry, the wizard has a note on, or maybe the hermit has found, that could be an interesting way to make this something that the hermit knows, but doesn't necessarily know that he knows. I could think about like the old myths about garlic keeping vampires away, right? Like, so maybe there is something that the hermit has festooned their hermitage, their hut with, and they believe that it protects them against the creature as part of their they've built up as part of their delusion, part of the unhinging of their mind that's come from being able to remember this thing and nobody else believing that it's real. And so if we present that properly, we end up in a situation where the players don't initially know what's just you know made up, what's superstition, what's just inventions of the hermit's mind, and what is real tangible knowledge. Uh, but it becomes a clue later on if the characters, uh, you know, as they encounter this creature again and again and again, and realize that no matter how many times it comes to the town, it never attacks the hermit's cottage or something along those lines. So there's got to be something there, that kind of deal. So that is something we could introduce very subtly in there. Um, yeah, good ideas, gang. Good ideas. I love where your heads are at on this. This is fun stuff. So, um, you know what? I'd say I would say go home and give all yourselves heroic inspiration on your next in your next adventure. Um, I accept that I'm the DM for a bunch of you guys, and you know what? Forget it. Go home, give yourself heroic inspiration for all your characters, whether I'm your DM or not. Uh, um, you guys know this has been cool stuff. So seriously, great ideas on all of this. Some really cool uh, stuff going into this creature. I think it's going to be really unique. I think it's going to be a ton of fun to play. So with that, thank you so much for joining the 100th episode of Let's Write Adventure. It has been awesome as always chatting with you all and hearing your ideas and talking this out as we go. Um, if you have enjoyed this content, I hope that you will like, subscribe, and leave a comment. That all that stuff helps the channel grow and helps get more people in the chat here. And we've come a long way in 100 episodes. I hope to keep plugging along with all your support. So that said, I'm going to go ahead and sign off here. And I will see you all at our regularly scheduled session on Wednesday. Talk to you then. Bye now.